So, regarding the Dominic Cummings story, I have felt angry on two fronts. Angry, number one, at the arrogance and the blatant hypocrisy of the government in defending Cummings. Um, and by government, I really mean cabinet level, um, because a large number of Tory MPs, or a significant number of Tory MPs, have taken quite the opposite stance. But increasingly, I've also been getting angry at something that really isn't getting that much attention, which is the doorstepping of Dominic Cummings. Um, and I have very mixed feelings about this because whilst I absolutely think that Cummings should get heat, I also think there's a certain behaviour of the press which they think is acceptable that never really gets spoken about, and it is this practice of doorstepping. I think doorstepping's pretty controversial at any time, should be controversial at any time. But with what's going on, those journalists in the scrum weren't exactly keeping a social distance. Um, the BBC actually claimed that they observed the social distancing guidelines. Well, clearly they don't. Clearly, the reporters that were sent there, and I hold their editors equally responsible, were not observing that. Now, to be clear here, I had this discussion with Nick Ferrari and LBC. And I must admit at the time I didn't know him that well. Only subsequently have I sort of found out his background. And Ferrari said to me, as an editor, and you want to get a statement or a perspective out of a high profile person about, their take on something. How else can you do it if they're not responding to calls or they're not in their office? That's in normal times. This was before the lockdown. And how I responded was, if someone doesn't do an interview, then just report that fact, and then the public can judge them. They can say, okay, they're running away from press scrutiny. But I've never liked the practice of doorstepping. I think it's a pretty odious practice, and I don't believe the media claims that it's a last resort. I think they do it because it's sensationalistic. I think it's just, I mean, if you're a journalist and you engage in doorstepping, how do you sleep at night? Do you really think you're a good journalist if you're ramming a camera in someone's face outside their own home? I mean, I appreciate they may be just following orders from their senior editors, and a journalist, if they refuse to do that, they'd be fired. So it, also goes back to source. But I must admit, I do not like it. I really don't like it. And the thing is, Cummings is getting a lot of heat at the moment. Prime Minister's response with the daily briefing was pretty pathetic. He even alluded to the fact that it would be perceived as double standards, but he claims so when people look into the background, they will sympathise with him. But the point here is there's very mixed messages coming out. People are going to be confused because, well, I say mixed messages coming out, but one thing that has been consistent is stay at home, self isolate. The government has been pushing that over and over again. People all over the country will have been in a similar situation to Mr. Cummings, and they didn't travel. So this is not about lacking any sympathy for his personal family situation. I don't think that's why people are angry. People aren't callous. They're not saying that, oh, he, as a parent, shouldn't care about his child. The point is, it's infuriating how people cannot see the double standards of this. The people who are rushing to defend Cummings. But I do think that the doorstepping itself needs to be called out. If I was Boris Johnson, I would have responded to this by getting Cummings to apologise, by accepting we cannot be putting out a message and demonstrating double standards. I have to say Nicola Sturgeon done the right thing by getting her senior medical advisor to resign. And I've no sympathy with the SNP politically, but one cannot dispute that Sturgeon handled that better than how Johnson has handled this. Um, I just think that the government's really showing how out of touch it is. These senior cabinet ministers, Johnson, Gove, Shapps, Raab, Sunak, they they just cannot see how this comes across, or if they do see, they simply don't care. Um, and it's pretty infuriating. So they now have to take the position, okay, well, this leading figure in the government, and I don't care if people say Cummings isn't elected, he is a central figure of this government. I don't see him as just some anonymous person. He's a very, very powerful figure. And anyone who can't see that is just being naive. Um, so he's a central figure in the government. They're closing ranks to defend him. So they now have to say, okay, he's been exposed. So rather than just grovelingly defend him and tell the public to back off and ease up a little bit and say, oh, all the criticism's unfair, just accept that it comes across as double standards. And now to say to the public, if you feel that you're doing the right thing, you are indeed allowed to travel. If they don't take that position, then how they can say that they're being consistent is just nonsense. It's clearly nonsense. But I do hope that those journalists who doorstepped Cummings also get some heat. I'm afraid they won't, because unfortunately, the way the media works, I'm not one to get into conspiracy theories, but I do think the media is very, very sloppy at introspection, very sloppy for the most part, in terms of they're very good at throwing stones, but as soon as the criticism turns in their direction, it doesn't matter. So summed up, I do think Dominic Cummings should be heavily criticised. I think Starmer's right to call for his resignation. I think Johnson's handled this very badly, as has the senior ministers. But I don't approve, I don't like the doorstepping practice. When they're, thrusting cameras in his face and going right up to him, you could see it in the footage as he was trying to get into his car. They were going right up to him, hardly 2 meters. It was a few feet at most. Um, Not only is it very odious, but it's actually breaking the regulations as well. So they're grilling this spin doctor, this advisor, for breaking the regulations. Fair enough, but don't then break the regulations yourself. It's a bit like paparazzi who hound people and then don't like when they're scrutinised. So I'm quite angry with the way the press has behaved in that regard. Not for criticising Cummings, but for doorstepping him. I just don't think it's the right approach. I think they should do something like, you know, offer him to do an interview, something like that. Um, but if you're doing that to someone outside their own house, of course they're going to be defensive. Of course they're going to want to get away from that as soon as possible. I think it's quite intimidating actually. I mean, I don't care who you are. If you go outside your front door and there's a cluster of a dozen people with cameras flashing in your face, um, people will say it's the price of fame, it's the price of power. I don't like it. I just don't like it. Let me know your thoughts.